Have you ever felt trapped? It's probably a feeling we've all experienced to some degree in our life, feeling trapped or imprisoned either by the circumstances we're in or we're tied to a geographical place for some reason. Yesterday, with the snowstorm that came in, there were many flights that were canceled and probably many individuals that were trapped at airports. My mom, thankfully, got into town a little bit late, but we've had that experience before, or I have, where you get to the airport and your flight is delayed because the airplane you're supposed to be departing on has not arrived yet, or for some other reason. If you remember the movie The Terminal with Tom Hanks, he's just stuck in an airport. He has no way to get out. And there are other circumstances in our lives that might be physical, they might be spiritual, they might be a variety of things. Then the next question is, have you ever been afraid of something? Maybe you're being pursued in school by the school bully, or you've got a coworker that always makes problems, and so when you see them coming, you feel trapped. Maybe you don't have an escape out. There are other reasons. Sometimes we have emotions that kind of make us feel trapped. So there's a variety of ways we can experience fear, emotions that bring about fear. We're going to, this morning, be looking at Psalm 142, where David expresses both of these things, that feeling of being trapped, that feeling of being afraid, of being persecuted, of being pursued by an enemy. So we'll read that first, then we'll look at some broader context. Psalm 142, a maskil of David when he was in the cave, a prayer. David writes, "With my voice I cry out, with my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. I look to the right, and I see there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, and you will deal bountifully with me." So we get a clue here as to where David is and what he is enduring at the time where he prayed this prayer, where he cried out to God in this manner. That clue lies in the title there when it says that he is in a cave. Well, David, as you know, had a very eventful life. I mean, he started as that shepherd boy, but then was thrown into the spotlight when he came to conquer the giant Goliath who was tormenting the Israelites. And so David strikes up a relationship with the current king's son, Jonathan. He's his best friend. But David just continues to keep growing in prominence and in the public view. He's being elevated. And it gets to a point where he's being elevated higher than Saul, and Saul is not happy about this. And so Saul decides that he is going to take David out. Saul is paranoid. Saul is self-obsessed with his own image and his own prominence. Not great characteristics in a leader. And David is doing nothing to try to usurp Saul. Certainly, David has been anointed as king of Israel, but he's not trying to push up the timeline on that. He's trying to honor Saul, and yet Saul wants him dead. So this is a little ways into the story, but in 1 Samuel chapter 21, after he has been on the road for a little while, it says, "And David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath." Now, Gath should maybe trigger something in your mind, because I believe that is where Goliath was from, Goliath of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, "Is not this David the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So if you were a leader and you were hearing these chants and hearing about these chants, it's like Saul's fine, but David's better. David is much more prominent. David is much more powerful. That would start to grind your gears a little bit. And so David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So he's afraid that if the word of this stuff has been going around here, perhaps his presence will draw Saul's attention and will cause him to have to get on the move again very quickly. So it says that he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands and made marks on the doors of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, "Behold, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" So David is trying to change this perception of him with his behavior, and it seems to work. So then it says in chapter 22, verse 1, David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam, and when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. And he became commander over them, and they were there with him about 400 men. And David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother stay with you, till I know what God will do for me." And he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet of Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold, depart and go into the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. So that seems to be where this lament of David takes place, in that cave there. It says, the commentary I was reading said that during that time David was fleeing from Saul, he spent a lot of time in caves. The Judean wilderness where David spent his fugitive years has abundant caves scattered throughout the region. So with that network of caves, David was able to probably move around a little bit. Even if Saul knew that David was in a cave, hiding in this region, there were many caves to move about from and to check. So he wouldn't be able to isolate him down to one certain point. So David could be moving. So David, that is where he is at. So it talks about him crying out to the Lord. "With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy on the Lord." So in Exodus chapter 2, verse 23, we see the Israelites crying out to God for deliverance, and they did in other circumstances throughout the book of Judges, where they're being oppressed in some way, and so they're crying out to God. So that's different than just simply coming before God and praying that God would be working in your life and that He would lead you. This is more of a place of desperation, of despair, certainly in some of the things the Israelites encountered and what David is encountering with Saul pursuing him and planning to have him killed. So he's crying out before the Lord, pours out this complaint before him, tells his trouble to him. So this is maybe not everything that David has to say about the matter, but these are the words that we have recorded. And he's also describing what he does. So he's being honest. He's bringing these specific fears, these specific things before God because they're bothering him. They're bringing fear into his life. And he doesn't like that. And none of us like that feeling of fear, that feeling of being afraid. Or as we get down towards the end of that psalm, that idea of being trapped or being imprisoned. You can be imprisoned without necessarily being tied to one specific location, but being on the run is like a prison. The feeling of despair is like a prison. So in the opening of this, the psalmist seems to indicate that he is making this address in the presence of a congregation or a smaller group. So that is another thing that points to that idea of once his brothers, family, and these others that make up that 400 that are with him have come into his presence. And so he is modeling this as well as just simply crying out before God. The people that are with him, that are falling under his leadership, they are seeing David pour out his heart, and they see an authentic individual. He's not trying to just masquerade as this brave character. Certainly David shows bravery, but he's also showing that softer side, that side that does struggle, that does fear. So as we see David turning to God when he is in distress, it shows that David trusts God. David refers to his spirit as weak, which can denote either a spiritual or physical collapse. So we think of that as, physically he's been on the run, so he's going to be struggling with that. And then just the mental wear, when someone feels something in their spirit, that's just kind of this culmination of their emotions and their mental faculties and how they're processing all of these things. So if someone's spirit is diminished, it means they're struggling. They're having trouble coping and making it through with many of the challenges that they are facing. So David shows that he trusts God, but that doesn't mean that David is not scared just because he trusts God. Certainly we trust God, but we experience moments of fear in our lives. When we have family members that are sick, when we have family members that get into trouble, whether it be in school or with the law or with sin, that causes fear. We trust that God can deliver them, but there's also that level of fear of what is going to happen to them. And so we see this weariness of David as all of these thoughts and things, even though he relies on God, they're all coming into that point where he's just becoming weary after enduring all these things. So in verse 4, it says that he looks to the right and sees that there is none who takes notice of him. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. The HCSB Study Bible says that an advocate or defender normally stood on a person's right. So when he says here that no one stands up for me, it literally means that no one recognizes me. No one cares about me is literally no one seeks my soul. This is indicating that the psalmist lacks support. So, there may be people present, but they're not really being supportive or being encouraging. They might be looking to David to get them out of the situation that they're in, to get them out of these problems. Or maybe they too are in desperation or in no place where they can give support. But what David is emphasizing here, that none of these people that are around me, none of these people that maybe in better circumstances I could trust, are standing next to me now. They're not giving me support. They're not giving me encouragement. They're not giving me anything to work with here. And, we do face challenges in life when we rely on people and they let us down. And that is why we look to God, to the one who can actually make differences. People can make differences in our lives, but people are at some point going to let us down, even if they are reliable. So David is not feeling this earthly support. He's not feeling support from his companions. Certainly now being on the run, his best friend Jonathan is not there to help him, to encourage him, to support him. And the fact that his best friend's father is trying to kill him, that's just adding to that level of weariness. So it says, I cry out to you, O Lord, I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. So he's expressing the way that he's feeling, and then he is making his petition. God, deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. And certainly the number of Saul's men is going to outnumber, even if David decided we're going to put up a fight, we're going to try to fight our way out of this, 400 people is not going to get you very far without the help of God. And then in verse 7, bring me out of prison that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. So then that's where we get that idea, bring me out of prison. So David feels trapped. The situation that he's in makes him feel trapped. Probably the emotional place that he is just feeling trapped. There's that level of hopelessness, that level of fear. It's as much of a prison as just the simply being on the run from Saul. So he is, instead of just throwing a pity party for himself, instead of just wallowing in despair, he is coming to God because he trusts God. He recognizes that God can deliver him from this. So what do we do with this? Well, I think this is maybe a good guide as we address those things in our lives that produce fear, those things that produce dread, those things that make us feel stuck, that make us feel trapped. Maybe in some situations we have actual enemies pursuing us. Maybe not to the level of Saul trying to kill us, but sometimes there are people at work that are gunning for us. They don't like us. They don't like the way that we do things, and so they're looking for every opportunity to get us in trouble or to try to get us fired. Maybe it is something less external than that, and maybe it's sin. We have these temptations, we have these struggles with particular sins in our life, and we feel that no matter how hard we try, that sin is always pursuing us. That temptation is always pursuing us. Maybe sometimes we feel trapped by bad dynamics in our relationships. Maybe we don't have a good relationship with our parents or our children or our siblings or other family members, or other relationships that we have, that maybe work relationships, maybe other things. But that can cause us to be trapped sometimes, that feeling of hopelessness. How do I connect with this person that I want to have a relationship, but there's bad blood right now? And maybe, like David, we get that sense of being trapped by the loneliness that we are experiencing. So those are a variety of things that we could view as prisons or things that are pursuing us or things that are causing us to fear. And I'm sure there's probably other situations you have experienced in your life that you could insert into that and identify with David. You may feel trapped or unsupported by family, friends, etc., but with David's mindset, you would have this idea that God's got you. God is going to support me. God is going to lead through me. We can think of Job. Job was a faithful man. He trusted God, but he felt unsupported too, right? He had some people, friends around him, his wife, say some really unencouraging things, maybe even some flat-out dumb things. And so sometimes we might experience that. The people around us are not offering support, they're not offering encouragement, or the way that they're trying to do those things is really not helpful. Sometimes people have the best intentions and the worst execution, and that is something that we have to deal with. Sometimes people lack awareness of the things that they say. And so when we're experiencing those things, we need to take a step back and remember God is the one who we rely on, not other people, to get us through. It's great when other people rise to the challenge to encourage us and to help us through, but we should be looking to God to get us through those things. So a few things to consider as we think about the psalm, and I'd encourage you to read through this maybe a couple times this week, and you can read back some more of that backstory, going back a couple chapters in 1 Samuel if you want to contemplate, try to get yourself more in David's headspace and what exactly he was going through, not just in the abstract, but detailed. But first thing, be honest with God. Here we see David, he's pouring himself out. Sometimes we look at Jesus' model for prayer, and Jesus was kind of going through those categories of, ask God to provide for you, praise God. All of those elements that are in the Lord's Prayer. It's not a rote prayer that we're supposed to go through. Some of the things inside those categories we can elaborate on. We can be honest to God. God, this is the way that I feel. God, I'm tired of this situation. God, this person is really grinding my gears, annoying me. God, I'm desperate for this relationship to be restored or this person to be healed. And, even if God doesn't heal the loved ones we have that are sick, He can empower us to be able to get through that and to be able to rely on Him and to find the joy that we have in the hope of the resurrection. So be honest. When you are struggling, you don't have to sugarcoat things. You don't have to be, polite. Just be honest. Throw those fears, throw those worries, throw all of that stuff before God. and be honest with how much you are struggling. We are weak, so it is okay to show weakness when we're praying. Second thing to remember is that God is our only refuge. There might be some temporary refuges that we experience in life. Certainly we have friends that we can rely on, family that we can rely on. Hopefully we all have those things in place. But if we're not relying on God and our human friends and family members let us down, then perhaps we fall into looking at different crutches and vices to get through, and that can open up the gates to sin. So if we have that idea that God is our refuge, like David had, that is a second thing to consider as we bring our problems and as we look at the problems we're experiencing in our lives. Third thing to consider is that God knows and God guides our path. So God knows the ways that we can cope with and get out of any situation if we rely on Him. He knows how He can guide our path and how to get us through. Doesn't mean things are going to go the way that we would like. Other people still behave in certain ways and make choices, and those things are things that we have to contend with. But God will guide our path, so even if the poor conditions that we are enduring continue, God can guide us in a way to deal with that in a healthy way, to maintain our faith and to maintain our witness. Fourth thing is just cry out for deliverance. That's what David does. We can be honest with God, but that idea of crying out, when the Israelites were being held captive in Egypt, crying out. David here, crying out. When Philistines or their other oppressors came about for the Israelites, cried out, and God sent deliverers. He sent Moses to lead the people out of Egypt. He sent Samson and Deborah and Barak and many others in the time of the judges to deal with particular situations that were causing distress to his people. So cry out for that deliverance. Another important thing, if we look down at verse 7 again, it's bring me out of prison that I may give thanks to your name. The righteousness will surround me, for you will deal bountifully for me. So he's saying that he's looking forward to that time where he can give thanks to God, and so we can anticipate praising God in our prayers. Anticipating an outcome that God guides, and anticipating the joy that we would experience in that and the thanksgiving that we will give when God works on our behalf. And then finally, to find hope in God's faithfulness. We all experience ups and downs in our lives. That's just a fact of the world, a fact of a world that has sin in it. So we can find hope in God's faithfulness, in God's promises. He promised life through His Son, His promise that He will provide for us. So we can find hope in the faithfulness that God shows towards us, that He will care for us, that He will send His emissaries, His messengers, His helpers to take care of us in those times of struggle. And so we need to be also mindful that our response matters. Sometimes those things that God sends our way, the ways in which God helps us, may come in unexpected ways through unexpected people. So we need to be open to the fact that God may use our enemies, God may use the last person that we expect to help. And that needs to be perceived as God's faithfulness in providing for us and caring for us. So it's okay to cry out to God. We all find ourselves in those situations where we're afraid, we're desperate, we feel trapped. And so we need to remember to go before God, to bring those things to Him, to ask Him to guide our path, to deal with those issues that we are experiencing, and to let Him know, God, I believe that you can do this, and I want to praise you for the thing that you are going to do to get me through this. Whether you change the actual situation or you change my view of what is going on, whatever it might be, just prepare to be thankful for how God will guide in that situation. Let's pray as the band comes up for our final song. God, thank you for the way that you provide for us, the way that you care for us. We thank you for the many blessings, but we know that with the blessings come challenges. Not everyone is faithful to you and to your word, and so sometimes we're hurt by others. Sometimes we're impacted by things that are out of our control, whether it be weather, whether it be illness, whatever the case. We look to you as the source of our strength, the source of our deliverance, and the source of our hope. That hope that became manifest in your Son, Jesus, through his obedience and that sacrifice that he made. So while we struggle in this life at times, I thank you for the promise that we have of your eternal kingdom, where there will be no struggle. So despite what we go through here, what we experience here, help us to be mindful of the blessings in our lives, but more so, help us to be cognizant and always thinking about the hope, that promise that we have through your Son, Jesus. And I pray that no matter what situation that we are going through, that we would be living lives of prayer, of joy, of thanksgiving. And I pray that as we deal with all these things in a healthy way that we might be experiencing, that we would shine a light, that we would model how to honor you through the trouble. We lift these things up to you in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.